Hello, Miami. David Winker here, and I'm here with Amanda Prieto from Save Calusa.
That's me. I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. The last time we were here, well, actually, we were here pre-hearing,
We were here pre-hearing, and you had Vanessa on recently.
and Vanessa was post-hearing.
Yes.
So last time you were here was pre-hearing, and could you give a brief synopsis of what happened at the hearing? What was it, 2 Wednesdays ago?
2 Wednesdays ago, yes. So the Miami-Dade County Commission was hearing the zoning application to change the zoning on the former Calusa Golf Course, which is 168 acres in West Kendall. And they voted to approve it against strong community opposition. We had thousands of residents, writing letters and signing petitions. We had a large, group that showed up to speak that day. It's very difficult. It's a challenge. It was, we're limited to 1 minute. So you have, 1 minute to kind of advocate for everything you've been fighting for over the last, 10 years in this long saga. And unfortunately, they passed it. The vote was 10-2. And what was a big disappointment for residents was that we feel our home commissioner, Commissioner Regalado, didn't address a lot of the resident concerns. So we had submitted a lot of letters in advance, a lot of emails with specific concerns, knowing that our time would be limited at the hearing itself, hoping that they would address those concerns at the hearing and, maybe find a compromise somewhere where at least some of our concerns would be addressed.
I think that one of the things that was I see this, I always say, like, I'm almost like vis-a-vis these municipal meetings, I'm like a trauma surgeon. Like, I've seen everything. So I'm not shocked by what I see, which is, a lack of democracy, frankly, a lack of public participation. But it still hurts when I see residents go through that gauntlet and be like, I wasn't heard. This was a complete waste of time. And that hearing was particularly egregious to me because it was like, why are we even here? And when you have sitting commissioners, like Commissioner Martinez, like Commissioner Heyman, just saying, like, I'm not an idiot. I know where this is going. Like, the fix is in.
Right.
And it's like, what does that do for our community? That it really unfortunately felt like a waste of time. And I'm going to get to why it wasn't, because it's actually given us a lot of legal reasons to continue the fight. And also, I want to talk about Ron McGill a little bit, because that did capture kind of almost a national audience. So we got a couple of videos to show people, but before we get to them, talk about what Ron's experience was and how kind of that took off, and what who Ron is, how we got him involved, and who and what happened.
So Ron McGill, as all of Miami-Dade knows, is a strong advocate for wildlife conservation. He's a spokesperson for Miami Zoo. He's been involved in this for decades. And we had, we reached out to a lot of nonprofits, to anybody related to wildlife conservation for guidance, very early in this process. Ron was on the list, hoping that, he might offer some insight. We also knew he lived in the area so that he might be a little more aware of what was going on. And he was definitely, supportive and, thanks for keeping me up to date, but definitely wasn't willing to take any kind of leadership role, wasn't actively involved. And then, we did a small protest at a ribbon cutting about within the week of the hearing date. And Ron happened to be there. And he walked right over and said, I'll be there at the hearing. And we thought, great. But we had really no idea what impact that would have or exactly what he was going to say, other than obviously he would be concerned with wildlife. So when he stood up and started speaking, I mean, the chambers were silent. It was, passionate. It was heartfelt. It was dramatic. It was everything that it needed to be. And because he's so well respected and well known, it got immediate attention. And that was so helpful to just bring increased awareness, because bringing awareness to this community advocacy has always been a challenge, because we're in unincorporated Dade. We don't have a municipality. So we're really kind of on our own to spread the word. And it's really difficult, especially during a pandemic.
Yeah, that's the other thing is, it was interesting to see. You never know, in doing this for a living, you never know what's going to capture people's interest. and having that voice. And then, but I think it was really important because he got upset because he's like, he didn't even have the minute. They gave him like 52
He was
seconds.
dismissed. It was
And
embarrassing.
I think that was, again, it was just that outrage of like, I can't believe like I've taken time out of my day to be here. I am a county employee. I'm passionate about wildlife. I'm telling you there's a problem and you're not listening to me. So let's talk post hearing. The vote comes down and there's been some developments. One, you have filed an ethics complaint, and the ethics complaint has to do with the notice.
Yes.
And the issue is, it's not a very sexy issue, but it is a technical issue that was brought to the county's attention before, and it was that they did not do the proper notice. And one of the things that was frustrating about that to me was, who pays for that notice?
The applicant, yes.
So the idea is like they bent over backwards to be like, no, we don't need to advertise this in the newspaper, where it's like the county's, it's not our taxpayer dollars.
Right.
And it seems the code is very clear that they should have run the ad,
Right.
and the developer should have paid for that. So that ethics complaint has been filed. And there was a development in the last couple of days. And I think the best thing to do is I'd like to just show the video to people. Can we go ahead and run the video and then we'll talk about it? I'm going to have you narrate it as we go on. So what are we looking at, Amanda?
So this is the Calusa golf course, and residents that back onto the golf course or even across the street started hearing loud noises. That was the first signal. And, we have a group where we share information. Does anybody have a visual on this? Can anybody see what's going on? I was actually in the area, so I went to the old gate, which is still fenced off, just to see if I could see anything visually, any equipment, that type of thing. I could definitely hear the equipment and the mulching. And then another concerned resident got a drone up in the air, and that's what caught this footage. So immediate concern from residents, because our understanding was, especially with the response from Mayor Cava, was that there were going to be extensive environmental studies done with DERM involvement and oversight independently before any trees or development were going to occur on this property.
So the idea is, what we're looking at here is, it's clearly like that looks like a tree and it's being yanked out of the ground. And the best practices, one of the things that came out of this is the mayor recognized, and it's the first time I've ever seen a no veto message, right? Usually you give a veto message while you're doing it. She gave a message why she wasn't vetoing, and she said, basically, these environmental issues have been brought to, we're gonna do this. And as part of what happened was the developer agreed to conduct the environmental studies before doing anything, for the obvious reasons, right? If it's full of environmentally protected animals, we have to, it triggers certain things.
Exactly.
So when I saw that video, it was very upsetting to me, because there's part of this is like, yeah, well, that's a perfect way to scare off all the wildlife. So when you show up, and so I want to show the second video, because you kind of see that. So now you're going to come inspect for wildlife, and this is what this is what you're going to see. This is what the studier is going to see. Right? There's the area cleared. The good news is, look at all the birds, right? You can see the birds as Elaine DeValle in Political Court Dito said, like, are those birds looking for their home? Are they looking for their hatchlings? Are they looking for food? But yeah, that, if you go environmentally study that, what are you going to see?
Nothing.
Blank ground.
Right.
Yeah. The wildlife
is gone. To the ground. And our concern was always that we didn't have much confidence in the surveys that were provided by the applicant. We had a lot of questions about it. Obviously, they didn't survey the rookery, for example, during nesting season. That seemed like a glaring oversight to us. And we were concerned specifically with trees, because we know there's high activity of the Florida endangered bonneted bats. We know that. Our acoustic data shows that. The developer's acoustic data shows that. Nobody is contradicting that. We know that they're there, but we don't have a good understanding of where and how they're using the property. The developer said they would do another roosting survey, which means they check the trees for bat roosting, which is why not touching the trees is so important. And I agree, I'm definitely, I'll admit, I am not an environmental expert, but I do go through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife documentation, and there are, rules on what type of equipment you can have near birds when they're nesting, what the distance is to protect it. And all we're asking is, excuse me, please, do these environmental surveys with oversight, thoroughly, accurately, before we do any development or tree removal. It's our last chance, right? You can replace a tree, but you can't replace the wildlife.
Yeah, it's those videos obviously got a lot of media attention because it is disturbing, and it seems like it's such a cynical play, right? It's like, oh, what wildlife? We've we've paved over the wildlife. The wildlife, it's not here. It will be interesting to see. I think one of the things that I struggle with, Amanda, is it's one thing. I've often said this, and sometimes I get pushback from clients and activists. It's like, to me, GL Homes is doing exactly what GL Homes does, right? I mean, they do not pretend to be environmentally conscious. They do not pretend to try to build sustainable communities. I don't think that I don't think that they're. I think that they are an old school developer that's just going to pave over everything. And I don't think maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they try to say that they're anything different than that. But what we rely on is our elected officials to hold the feet to the fire and say, no, you're coming into our community, you're doing this. This is what we need. And we're going to enforce these basic rules. And it seems like that's the breakdown. The breakdown is like my beef is with the county. The county, everything I've seen so far, from the lack of public participation to what's happening, the environmental crimes, as far as I can tell, that's happening, is the county not doing its job.
There definitely doesn't seem to be a lot of accountability, or nobody's taking responsibility for any of this. Nobody stood up at that hearing and said, hey, why weren't these studies done before we make this decision? Why weren't they done properly? It was really astounding to me that none of the other commissioners, so our home commissioner obviously spoke, Commissioner Regalado, Commissioner Heyman and Martinez spoke, strongly in opposition. Nobody else had even one question, not one question, after residents stood up and said, nobody's ever heard my concerns. Nobody's addressed them.
And 5,000.
We had 5,000 letters to CAVA saying, please veto this. Yeah. Don't make a decision yet. Do the environmental studies. Listen to resident concerns. I stood up as a parent and spoke to our home commissioner, who was a former school board member, and said, my kids go to this school.
And the school's jam-packed.
It's full. Where are these kids going to go? Busing them over to hammocks isn't a realistic solution. And, that's really concerning. And nobody even spoke about it. Nobody addressed it. So we really felt dismissed. We're definitely, I wrote op-eds. I've been on community papers, which I appreciate, basically screaming, somebody step in and hear our concerns and address them. And we really just don't feel that happened at all. It's really disappointing.
It's interesting because I think, yesterday, there was it yesterday or Wednesday? I think Wednesday. There was another next commission hearing, and it was on the boat show, and it had to do with expanding the boat show behind, at least it was called Miami Marina before, but the one behind what used to be the Herald building, the marina there, and they wanted to expand it, and they wanted to do sea trials. And the DERM director, yes. Lee Hefty, he's the director of DERM, Miami-Dade DERM. Yeah. He came in and he said, don't do this. This is not, we got to protect the bay. And then the bay czar, I guess they call her, she was like, I can't remember her name, Abage, I think. But she came in and she was like, don't do this. And it was very interesting because Commissioner Gilbert, he came out and said, there was a line, he said, we're not a county of manatees, we're a county of people. And it was interesting because I actually personally like the guy. I see him at football games at Traz Powell. But I do think that was a misguided comment, because our environment is what drives our tourism. Our natural environment is what drives our tourism. And the two pillars of our economy are real estate development and tourism. And, we're having this annual fish kill in the bay. The bay doesn't have enough oxygen. And our beaches are being shut down for fecal matter. And I don't know, it seems like we're cannibalizing, we're letting development overreach Like it seems like we have to recognize like this is starting to hurt tourism. Like every time there's an international story about Key Biscayne being shut down because of fecal matter, it's not good. And I don't know where that disconnect is. And this idea of like the bad publicity of, of messing with the manatees. Like manatees are part of the our bay is such a critical resource. And I think the other thing that bothers me is every one of these politicians, without exception, is saying we got to be sustainable. We're in a climate. I mean, listen, the city of Miami declared the city of Miami has declared a state of emergency, right? A climate change state of emergency. And I think that it's what we're seeing very readily is everybody is very quick to say the words. I believe in this. This is important. We have to be resilient. We're on the as the Mario Ariza book, which I encourage everyone to read, is on the shore Miami on the shores of climate catastrophe. And really his book is interesting because it's like it's really not it's not a matter of if, it's when, right? We're having sea level rise. Now, is that going to take 200 years or is that going to take 25 years, right? It is what it is. We have to start dealing with resiliency. And this is not a good place to be where people are saying certain things and then not doing them. And these were two perfect examples of like it's so clear what the right answer is. If you really believe in that stuff, they're and they didn't do it.
Right.
And so I don't know what the path forward is. Like what's the path forward for, not to pick on the mayor, but the mayor pushes all of this stuff. And then when push comes to shove, it's just business as usual.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if it's stronger environmental codes. I don't know if it's more oversight, if people just elected officials need to take responsibility for their decisions. All of the above, residents need to be informed when they're voting for people. But you're right. If they're saying, I am, water quality and climate is important to me, but then they ignore the environmental experts, then what do residents do?
Yeah, and I think the thing that struck there was a great article. Jenny Stelinovich from WLRN wrote a great article about basically saying the rules are on the books.
Right.
Like that. I think that's one of the problems we're having here is if they would just enforce what's there, we would be okay. But that's the breakdown. And I tweeted last night. It's like one of the things that I find in law school that you take a course called jurisprudence, and it's like the philosophy of law, right? What is the law? And it's kind of like, is it what the legislature says? Is it what the judge says? Is it what God says? Is it law and nature? And it's kind of the origins of all this. And I think that one of the things that, you talk about in law school is like what, they talk about, rogue regimes, right? Nazis, Pinochet, bad, just, objectively bad governments that are doing bad things to people, violating human rights. Committing the Holocaust, some of the worst things that have happened. That was all done extremely legally, right? The not when you go back in law school, you study the Nazi codes, and it was all there. Like they did it very Germanically. It was all set out very carefully, and but it's like that's a bad law. And so in studying like what happens in a rogue situation, like I tweeted out yesterday, like we are dealing with a local government that's gone rogue. We have a local government that's not following its own laws. It's not following its own directives of its people. And it's kind of uncharted territory. Like I don't really know what you do. Like it's almost like we're at the point where there's nothing that can be done except political change.
Right.
And political change in our system's so difficult because of the money.
Right.
We had, not to beat up the Save Calusa tribe, but, there was a very clear choice. You had three candidates, Michael Rosenberg, Cindy Lerner on one side, Raquel Regalado on the other side. And I think that, in Raquel Regalado's defense, she came out and was like, I'm in favor of this. Like it's not like she's done some other issues like the Playhouse where
Right.
She said she was in favor of preservation as flip-flop. There was no flip-flop here.
Yeah.
And she got elected. And so I think that one of the problems, not to chastise ourselves, but, it's like, yeah, we're complaining about it, but elections matter.
Right.
And she got elected. And I think she if she was here today, she may say, I have a clear mandate.
Right.
I said what I was going to do, build 550 homes. And that's what happened.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's disappointing that residents don't feel heard. Like she is supposed to be our voice, right? And she's supposed to represent our concerns, compromise, find a solution, whatever it is. And we definitely, even if we disagree on what that solution is, we don't even feel heard at this point. So that's a big concern. She only won. I think she won by less than 1%. It wasn't a clear cut
Mandate.
yeah. So and District 7 is big. We are somebody called us the little finger of District 7, and that kind of stuck with me. We are way West Kendall. I mean, our concerns are so different than those on the, more
Yeah.
eastern side. And I think a lot of people were not aware
Think about it. You
of
go
Calusa, right?
from Key Biscayne
Exactly.
to Calusa. I mean,
Yeah.
that is, it's like, talk about gerrymandering. It's like, it's so crazy how all your issues are so different than here's Key Biscayne, that has a robust village government all the way to you guys, unincorporated
Exactly.
West Kendall.
Yeah. And so if we go back to the notice for a minute, the county does a half-mile radius from the property. That's what they do for a mailed notice. And so that's a really good example of how people in Biscayne have no idea where Calusa is or what's going on. And so that's why that newspaper notice is really important. The most awareness we got was after Ron McGill spoke, for sure. Yeah. Right. And that's too late.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's really difficult to have people engaged and aware of what's going on, especially, if notice isn't done properly.
It's interesting because it reminds me of sometimes in college football, I think about, I don't know why, I think I have a baseball background. And I think about sometimes, like it'll be, Alabama versus whoever. And it's like, if you played 7 times, Alabama's going to win that game 7-0. And I think that one of the things that's frustrating about this is like, even with everything that's happened, I think if you held this vote 10 times, that commission is going to vote 10 times.
See, I'm still an optimist. I don't know. I don't know that all of you're laughing at me. I don't know that all of those commissioners really understood what happened.
I don't think they care. I mean, I hate to say it, but I really, having watched it, I don't, my commissioner is Eileen Higgins.
Yeah.
She talks about parks all the time. She didn't say a word.
Yes.
I don't think she cares. I don't think that I am, it was very disappointing.
Yes.
Right. And I think that, and I'll close with this. I think that one of the things that's so disappointing is like, I've worked with you for years on this, the community, you guys were looking for a compromise. Like no one was arguing that Facundo Bacardi needs to leave this land empty.
Right.
We wish he would. He wished he'd sell it to the county.
Yes.
But that's not the reality. We're in Miami. We're, as Elvis Cruz says, of developers, for developers, by developers. We live in a pro-development state, in a pro-development county, in a pro-development city. That's where we are. But I think everyone saw there was a possibility for compromise here. 300 homes, 30-acre nature preserve. Like there was ways to have done this. And it's almost like the greed of just, going for it.
Yeah.
And I think also, I will tell you personally, I was a little disappointed. Here's GL Homes. When I stood up and I said, when they lifted the covenant, the excuse, when I would say like, they're going to ask for 550 homes, they're going to ask for 550 homes, they're going to ask for 550 homes. GL was very much like, Winker shouldn't say that. You need to stop him. That's not true. No one's talking about 550 homes. He's lying. Yeah. And of course, what did they ask for? 550 homes.
Yes.
So I don't think they were truthful from the beginning.
Yes.
I think if they had told, and Sally Heyman addressed that, like if you had told me this is what you were going to do, and that's the breakdown in the system of like, it's the compartmentalizing, right? It's the compartmentalizing of each step of the way. It's like, well, all we're asking is for this covenant. We've technically met the requirements. We'd like for you to lift this. All we want is 1 home per 5 acres.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think, if the developer had come in and said, listen, we want to work with the community. We want to build something that the community is going to buy into, and we will compromise, right? What do you need? Do you need a bigger school? Do you need a community center? Do you want a park? Are you concerned about wildlife? If they had sat down and proposed something that the community bought into, this is a whole different discussion, right? But that's not what happened. There was a land use covenant that was supposed to protect this land. And so they negotiated with the votes that they needed to release that covenant. And the rest of us, there's, 6,000 residents in Calusa, we were completely ignored. They had one town hall meeting. We weren't allowed to speak. I've been screaming about wildlife and, the studies for months, and they weren't addressed. We residents documented the rookery. We reached out to Fish and Wildlife. We got them added to this map of imperiled wading birds. And that's not even in the county reports. Nobody even acknowledged that. And I don't understand. That's a state agency focused on wildlife protection. And that wasn't even presented to commissioners in the staff recommendations or the DERM reports.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like, a couple people reached out to you, they reached out to me also. It's just like there's nothing more you could have done. Like we queued it up. It's like it was almost like a perfect storm, like a case study. It's like this is Parks and Rec land,
Right.
had a covenant, had, and just at every step of the way, it was just every excuse was given for a better outcome. Like it's a suboptimal outcome. And it's a really, it's interesting on some level. I've been thinking about it. It's like we're almost like, and some of the battles I'm having with some of the corporations, like for example, Aimco, at the Hamilton on the Bay. It's like we're almost in like a certain place in capitalism where like these companies don't care about the bad publicity. Like I don't think GL Homes, they're embracing. It's like, oh, like if you are an investor in GL Homes, like maybe your attitude is like, look at these guys go. Like they're going for it.
Right.
Like they're going to kill all these birds. They're going to pave over, protect. They have the clout. They have the will. They don't care. And they're just going to destroy these birds, destroy this bad environment. And I don't, so it's almost like a shareholder responsibility. I don't know if they're publicly traded, actually, now that I think of it. But like their investors don't care. And maybe their investors embrace that. I've often thought about with Aimco, like Aimco is, when you Google them, it's America's worst slumlord, right? And it's like their stock's doing well. And maybe the reason their stock's doing well is if you're an investor, it's like, oh, these are the bad guys. Like they're going to go for it and they're going to maximize profit at all expense. And so I don't know, where that goes, and they're going to, shout out to Danny, who did like, the political contributions to everybody.
Oh, yes.
It was very sobering. Just like, oh my, hundreds of little corporations, with that same address, like they had just, hitting everyone with all this money.
I mean, one example from that is GL Homes bought 2 homes on the Calusa Ring that would eventually be knocked down to make the entrance. And who made political contributions? Those LLCs that purchased those homes, right? So it doesn't even say JL Homes. It's like 9810 Calusa Club Drive, if you're paying attention, right? And it's just, why have rules if they're not going to be enforced? If you can get around it by just, having 30 LLCs and nobody's paying attention, it's really frustrating.
It's interesting because I've been thinking about that, where it's like, we make with the Jennings disclosure.
Yes.
That people have to disclose who they've met with. It's almost like it'd be interesting to see if we could do almost like a referendum to require before everyone votes, you'd have to disclose like I have received X amount,
Love it.
And it's something to think about, where at least we know, because I always say to people, it's like, I'll read anything. I just want to know what's your perspective, sure. Right? Like I very few perspectives I think are not worthy of consideration, but I think you have to be upfront about where you're coming from. Right. So I think it's fair to say, okay, you've received 100,000 from GL Homes. Well, I need to look, I'm now going to listen to what you say through that lens.
Exactly.
Yes. And I want to be clear. I think politicians can take money and then push back. Sure. I mean, I think you can on principle say, I've taken your money, but I was very clear with you. I'm not willing to go this far. And so I don't want to make it seem like as soon as you take the money, you're bad. But I think that you need to disclose and you need to push back and have these principles.
Right.
Raquel Regalado pushes herself as an environmentalist. I would ask the question, did anyone see that during that hearing?
Right.
Were those environmental concerns addressed in that way? And I think that we, part of it is, I think, is holding them accountable. It's interesting because like on social media, we sometimes get some pushback of saying like, why, is what you're doing any good? Yeah. And I share with you, I'm not as skeptical as that. I think, shining the disinfecting truth of the light of the truth on people is important. And, we'll see. So it's interesting sitting with you because like I think you and I, neither you or I are discouraged. The battle's going to continue, and honestly, I think the overreach of what they did is going to give us some legal grounds to ask for some judicial review of some of this, including the notice provisions. So I want to make sure I don't want us to sound too cynical. We all have we have daughters that are coming up in this world, and like I always tell people I go to bed at night and I just think to myself like, did I make the world a better place today or a worse place? And that's my standard, as I sit there and say goodnight prayers with my daughter. And it's just like, I think that we have to continue the fight, and I would encourage everyone who's watching, do what you can. Let's keep fighting this, and and holding the government accountable. I mean, one of the problems we're having is, again, I go to that rogue thing. If your government's not enforcing the law, what do? Do you just let them get away with it? I don't think that's the answer. I think we have to keep fighting.
I agree. So safecalusa.org. It's not over. We're still fighting. We have a GoFundMe. Stay tuned and be engaged.
Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. Happy holidays to everyone. Happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas coming up. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.